Hey team, and welcome to another video in our Astrological Magical Elections video series. Thank you guys so much for being here in what is our first, official video of 2023. And I saw these glasses and I had to have them partly because they're gold and sparkly, and that's really fun for me. And then it kind of reminded me how much I enjoy these, just kind of like as a concept. Because I think it's funny that like 2000 to 2009 were like peak marketing for these glasses because like the double zeros, right? And that's perfect. And it's just kind of funny to me that that I guess partly that these like novelty New Year's glasses still exist while not having updated anything. And this is a little less. It's just like this is like why do we still have these in 2023? You know? And I don't know. I've seen some that are designed much more ridiculously than this. But yeah, just the great mystery of our time is how much longer New Year's novelty glasses can continue after having like a spike in, maybe not necessarily like popularity, but like a spike in relevancy from 2000 from 2000 to 2009. So enjoy this with me. But today we are going to talk about our magical elections opportunities that we are going to have between our Cancer full moon on January 6th and our Aquarius new moon on January 21st. And because because this is here, I can't just like look down like slyly at my notes, so I have to like totally lean into it, which is super great. But because we're dealing with a full moon to a new moon, we're of course dealing with our waning moon period. And we do have a good amount of elections to talk about while we're here today, which is great. Because a lot of times the kind of waning moon talismans are a little bit less popular, I guess, a little bit less like ideal, a little bit less potentially relevant to a lot of people. Just because when we're dealing with waning moon stuff, especially with lunar mansions, we have to incorporate that waningness, that giving away, that giving up, that letting go of things. And while that's an important part of life, it's something that we've kind of been taught to always see as painful in some ways, and it can be. Loss and grief and all those things are definitely very painful experiences. But we're trying to like utilize that in more positive ways with the waning moon. So you have to be a little bit tricky in some cases. So but with all that said, let's go ahead and dive into our elections. We're going to take this chronological order this time. So let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, so our first electional opportunity of 2023. Well, I guess that's not true because there's there was stuff in the previous video that crossed over the year. So our first official magical election in our first official video of the new year, we're going to qualify that as much as we can, is going to be for the 14th Lunar Mansion. And the 14th Lunar Mansion is one of those mansions that is very much in tune with the waning moon, probably a little bit too in tune with it. It's one of the more, I guess we'll say, severe lunar mansions when it comes to this type of a waning moon energy. Probably one of the most severe that I really like to engage in. There's one that's like really kind of crazy that I don't mess with. But the 14th is probably on that line. We'll say it's a lot more intense in its ability to separate and pull things apart. So, and that's really what this is about. The 14th Lunar Mansion, it is about separating, about cutting things away from us or cutting things up. But it can be really, really useful for making us kind of realize or help us to process the finality of things and to achieve closure in various situations. The image of the 14th Lunar Mansion I think is really interesting because it's like of a dog holding its tail in its mouth. So this kind of like dog chasing its tail kind of energy. And just sort of how much that is like a visual metaphor for futility and wasted energy and effort. And I think that's really helpful. Like, of course it sucks to have to come to realize that this thing that we've been after, or this thing that we've been doing or putting energy into, ultimately is never going to pay us back. It's ultimately like wasted energy. Like, this is never going to be what I want it to be. And so at least the 14th Lunar Mansion can help us from falling into like the sunk cost fallacy. Like I've already put so much energy into it. All that energy is wasted if I don't continue to do that, if I don't continue to pursue that. When that's actually not true. It's the energy that you expend after coming to that realization that's wasted. If you stop or if you continue to go. So while it does suck to have to face that, the 14th Lunar Mansion can help us to see it much more clearly and much more quickly than just having us kind of spin our wheels. And so for those kinds of situations, I really think the 14th Mansion is helpful in helping us gain kind of that closure, closing those doors or windows or whatever that kind of keep us stuck with whatever it is that we're trying to, like, maybe move away from. So for the North American version of this chart, it takes place on January 12th at 3:43 a.m. is what this chart is set for. And this one is very delicate, very, very, very particular. So be careful with it if you're going to use it. So what we're looking for here is we have the moon in the 14th Lunar Mansion in the 10th house. And at this time, she's applying this trine to the sun here. Trines to the sun are very helpful, especially when it comes to helping us kind of realize or see things for as they really are, which can be an important part of this whole 14th Lunar Mansion process. At the same time, the moon's unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, and the ruler of the first house here is Jupiter here in Aries with Sagittarius on the ascendant. And what's very particular, very specific about this chart are two things. The first is the moon's position in relation to the sun. 21 degrees 54 minutes to 21 degrees and 18 minutes. So, within a little bit more than half a degree apart from each other, which means that individuals who live more to the west of me may not be able to utilize this election because after the moon separates from the trine to the sun, she'll apply to the opposition of Jupiter, and that's not as good. That's not really the kind of energy that I would want to bring into this. The other thing that's really important is the ascendant is also in a very particular place. So I offer this up as a potential talisman while also being aware that it's very sensitive to timing, which means it may not work for a lot of people. And because of its sensitivity, how kind of severe the 14th Lunar Mansion can be and how it does things, and kind of the no room for error or being late kind of a thing. I understand many people may not want to utilize this talisman, and that's totally fine. But for those of you who can be there, and are interested, knock yourself out. But the sensitivity with the ascendant is that we want to make sure we're in the Sagittarius. Scorpio ascendant's not going to work because Mars is retrograde, and I don't do retrograde rulers of the first house. So with Sagittarius rising, we get to Jupiter as the ruler of the first house, which is much preferred. But if we go too far down into the early Sagittarius, then Mars will form a strong opposition with the ascendant, which is also something that we probably don't want to have involved in this talisman. And for some of you, you may already not really want this. You may not really like this election just because of how close the Mars ascendant opposition is. Different people kind of have different orbs for connections with the ascendant, and I think that's totally fine. Mine is about 5 degrees. So this being 8 degrees apart is fine, but I understand if maybe you have like a 10 degree kind of an orb around the ascendant and so don't feel comfortable with the Mars, that's totally fine. Either way, this Mars is going to be involved in the election somehow because it is the 14th Lunar Mansion. It's about severing, it's about cutting things off, it's about separating stuff, and that's really things that Mars likes to do, and Mars does very well. So keep that in mind. It could be, and I think that this election it particularly could be very useful for cutting oneself off from another individual because of Mars's position in the 7th house of another individual. So that could be an angle that you play into it somehow, or could be an election that is particularly useful if that is a situation that you are currently in. So keep that in mind with this election, that it has to be very particular. You don't have a whole lot of room for wiggle. And people who are further west of me may not be able to really utilize it because if the moon is already past the sun, then the next aspect probably is not going to be super helpful. The Australian version of this chart takes place on January 12th at just after 6 p.m., about 6:15. This chart is set for 1813. And this chart is much less particular, much less sensitive than the North American version was. So here we've got that moon still in the 14th Lunar Mansion. But now she is in the 3rd house, can join the cusp of the 3rd house, her house of joy, rather than on the in the 10th house like she was in the North American version. Now Cancer rises, which makes the moon the ruler of the 1st house, so we don't really have to worry about too much. The moon is not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ascendant is not afflicted by Mars or Saturn, so we're not kind of juggling that Mars like we were in the North American version of the chart. The only thing that we want to make sure that we're doing is that we maintain a Cancer ascendant. And in some ways, I guess you could argue that this chart is a little bit time sensitive. It is a little bit particular because you can't start too early or else you'll have the Gemini ascendant. And that's going to make Mercury the ruler of the 1st house. And I don't do retrograde rulers of the 1st house and talismans. It never works out. And then then you want to make sure that the moon doesn't fall into the 2nd house. So that's kind of your other end of it. Like that's kind of your window. Your window for this talisman is like whenever the Cancer ascendant begins, and your window is over when the moon gets too far from the 3rd house cusp, whatever that looks like to you. For me, about 5 degrees. If you're one of those like immediately after it moves beyond the cusp, then we're done. That's fine. So that's kind of what you're managing here. So a little bit more room to breathe in the Australian version. So there you go. Unfortunately, there is no Western Europe or North African version of this chart. So I apologize for not saying that at the beginning. You guys will just kind of have to sit this one out, but you will have some fun stuff coming up in a second. So I thought I would get tired of these glasses, but I actually kind of love them because the lenses, the fake plastic lenses, are kind of tinted. Oh, now I smudged them with my fingerprints. So I don't have to like deal with my lights like in my eyes. So this might just be how I do all my videos from now on with these fun novelty New Year's glasses. I may be the one person who keeps them in business in the upcoming years. So our next electional opportunity is actually going to be for a 15th Lunar Mansion talisman. Now, the 15th Lunar Mansion, if we were going to utilize that in like a more waxing moon setting, we would talk about it more in relation to like friendship and, you know, positive reputation or getting better financial resources or opportunities. But in a waning moon talisman, we're not going to do any of that. Instead, we're going to focus on its other power, which is like the suppression of rumors. So it kind of like a manipulation of public opinion about oneself by kind of keeping your name out of other people's mouths or keeping yourself from being attached to things that are, you know, bad news or things like that. So very useful to kind of like counter and like to kind of preemptively counter any sort of like weird internet rumors or, you know, workplace rumors to keep yourself out of talk around the water cooler, so to speak. Can be a really great way of kind of like flying under the radar, just kind of like being out of the gossip pool. So in this election, this one is going to be set for North America. Like I said, Western Europe and North Africa don't have an opportunity for this one. But the North American version of this chart takes place on January 13th at around 1849. Let's see here. We have the moon placed now in the 15th Lunar Mansion, of course, because that's what we want it to be, and in the third house, which I think is actually kind of interesting because the third house is about like gossip, rumors, and, you know, talking amongst peers, kind of a thing. So I think that's interesting to have there. At the same time, the moon is applying, here we go, to the trine of Venus in the seventh house, which I also think is kind of fun because Venus in the seventh house would be like positive things from other people. So that's kind of interesting, especially with Aquarius being an air sign. I don't normally read this deeply into magical elections, but I do think it's really fun when the placements in the chart kind of line up with what the talisman is supposed to be for. So I think this is very fun. Venus is a benefic planet, so she doesn't want to say bad things about people. You know, she wants good things about people to come out. So I like this. Built into this chart, where it's a more focus on a benefic planet, who kind of protects one's reputation, who, you know, cleanses. Venus is big on cleanliness, like cleanses or cleans up things being said about people. So all in all, I think that's really fun. The ruler of the first house in this selection is going to be the sun, because Leo's on the ascendant. The sun's here in the sixth house, which I think is interesting again because the sun is cadent in this, and like being cadent kind of keeps you out of the spotlight in some way, especially with the sun under the earth where it can't be seen. So there's a lot of fun things, I guess, in this election that makes it a little bit more fun. Especially, that was really insightful, Ryan. There's a lot of fun things in this chart that makes it very fun. Wow, you really nailed that description. There's a lot of fun stuff. A lot of fun symbols in this election that I think makes it very potent or specifically sympathetic to this cause, which is always fun when you can get that stuff. On top of it all, I like Mars in Gemini, like weaponized words, and the 11th house, groups of people. Like, it's just, the hits keep coming. What a fun thing. What a fun thing to be a part of. So the sun is in the sixth house. The sun is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ascendant is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, so too is the moon, and that's exactly what we would want in something like this, right? Where our whole goal is to avoid malice, is to suppress rumors, is to, you know, knock out bad words being said about us. So the last thing that we would want is like a malefic connection, unless we're trying to manipulate those rumors to be like a particular kind of a thing, which is beyond the scope of what I'm trying to accomplish here. But all in all, a really great chart, not only insofar as like it's a good application of the 15th Lunar Mansion in a waning moon, but also just how a lot of the symbolism of the chart hits really well. The Western Europe and Northern African version of this chart is set up a little bit differently. Now the moon is in the ascendant, but this chart is set for January 14th at just 2 minutes after midnight is what I have here. So the moon's in the ascendant in the 15th Lunar Mansion. At this time, she's still maintaining that trine with Venus that we definitely want. The ruler of the first house is also this Venus. Venus is not afflicted by Saturn. We're a little bit far from that conjunction to really have to worry about it. And trines to Saturn are not really what I would consider afflicting at all. Unfortunately, a lot of like the fun symbolism for the placements that we had in the North American version didn't really come over to the Western European version because of how we had to move the chart around to make it fit right. So like we don't have that Venus in the 7th, the moon's not in the 3rd. They're in the 5th and the 1st respectively. So we kind of lose a lot of that. And that's unfortunate. But I do like one thing that I guess I didn't mention in the North American version is I liked the kind of transfer of light that's happening between the Mars, like the moon separated from Mars, and then she applies to Venus. It's like making negative things into good things, like the taking the like hostile, weaponized, negative words that people say about you. The moon takes those and sends them to Venus, who's able to kind of transform them into more positive things, positive, sweet things. So I also like that connection with the moon here and how she's able to facilitate that movement a little bit. That's something that's also valid in the North American chart. It's not specific to this one, but it is an additional touch, we'll say, for describing or symbolizing the powers of the 15th Lunar Mansion talisman in this regard. So yeah, it's always good to have yourself covered from situations like this. And if you're in a situation or, just would like to avoid situations where this could become a thing for you, the 15th Lunar Mansion is actually very helpful. So definitely recommend picking that up. All right, so our third electional opportunity for this, for what are we, Cancer full moon period, is going to be for the 16th Lunar Mansion. The 16th Lunar Mansion is another one of those that can kind of do slightly different things depending on if it's being used in a waxing or a waning moon context. I keep hitting my desk and my camera keeps shaking. That's not super unusual for lunar mansions. A lot of them have kind of have waxing or waning personalities or abilities, though there are some that kind of fit more squarely into one category more than another, and sort of give up their kind of like specialize in one, and so kind of give up their ability to do things in the other. It's a little rare, but it does happen. Like the third lunar mansion is one I think of a lot. It's very squarely, it specializes very heavily in waxing moon stuff, so it isn't really useful in waning moon stuff. But Aldebaran, the 16th lunar mansion, is one of those that can do either very well. More specifically, the 16th lunar mansion is very focused on like monetary concerns and finances and things like that. In a waxing moon phase, which is not what we're dealing with here, we would tend to look to the 16th lunar mansion for help in making money, particularly when it comes to like increasing commerce. For people who are involved in businesses like retail, like that buy and sell, the 16th lunar mansion is very helpful. In a waning moon aspect, which is what we're using it for here now, the 16th lunar mansion is much more focused on debts, debt management, money management, repaying debts, repaying loans, applying for like grants and loan forgiveness programs, or like refinancing and negotiating kind of things. So this is really more the area that we're focusing on the 16th lunar mansion right now. It's if you're focused on paying off debts, working your way out of debts, helping to strategize how to do that, or get various like assistance in being able to do that. The 16th lunar mansion is very helpful for doing that for you. So make sure to look into that if you are at all struggling with these very, very difficult to get a hold on area of life, or sort of one that can quickly spiral out of control. So for North America, this is an election that everybody is going to get to utilize. So it has a North American, a Western Europe, a North African, and an Australian version. So anywhere in our typical 3 locations should be able to utilize this one as long as you can, fit it into your own personal schedule. Yeah. So for the North American version of this chart, it takes place on January 13th at 23:49, so just 10 minutes before midnight. And here in our chart here, we've got the moon on the ascendant in the 16th lunar mansion. And at this time, she is applying this trine to Venus. So this is a very kind of a close trine aspect here. So another one of those situations where people who are more west of me in the mountain and the Pacific time zones may not be able to utilize this one exactly as it looks like, because you see 53 to 57, like 8-ish, 9-ish minutes later, the moon is separated from this aspect and we're no longer talking about this Venus trine. While we have the Venus trine, those of us in the central and the eastern time zones for North America should be able to utilize this very well. Venus is a benefic planet. She's about things like forgiveness and cooperation and negotiation and compromise. So in that regard, Venus can be a very helpful ally when it comes to money management. She can be very good about giving gifts, additional money to help pay things off, that kind of a thing. After this, though, we move to the trine of Saturn immediately afterwards. And I don't hate this, honestly. So after the trine of Venus, the moon will move to the trine of Saturn. I know it looks like she's going to go to the square of the sun first, but the sun will move past 48 minutes of its degree, and so the moon will hit Saturn before coming back to the square of the sun. So keep that in mind. But I don't dislike the Saturn trine here, just because Saturn here can be much more utilized in like the process of paying off a loan or of paying off debt, kind of like getting you into the habit of how to build good financial habits. That's really something more that Saturn is more inclined to. So it might be a little bit more of like an uphill struggle for utilizing the Saturn rather than the Venus, but the Saturn can help give better financial skills later on down the road if that's something that you are, if that is a skill that you were not taught. The Western Europe and Northern African version is a little bit different. Here, the moon in the 16th Lunar Mansion is on the midheaven, and she is more steadily applying that trine to Venus. So individuals in Western Europe, it shouldn't really matter very much kind of like what your time zone is, because now we have about a half a degree, which is about like 2-ish hours to complete. So that all should be really fine there. Again, the Venus trine can be very helpful for getting assistance for renegotiating and compromising financial, like for financial situations or financial loans, refinancing debts. That ability to negotiate and compromise is something that Venus is very strong in. The ruler of the ascendant here is going to be this Jupiter in the third house. Oops, just drew a line right through him. It's going to be Jupiter here in the third house in Aries, which is fine. The Mars opposition has passed and is far enough away, you don't have to worry about it. So you may decide that you want to play with this a little bit more, to kind of push the ascendant back down some more, like a later degree, to get further past the Mars opposition. I think that's totally smart to do if you're at all uncomfortable with how, if you're not comfortable with how close these are, if you want this to be a bit further, then do that. Play with that, push this a little bit down closer to the 20-degree mark. That can be fine. Just make sure that the moon here doesn't completely fall off of the midheaven. What else was I going to say? Let's see. The moon is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ascendant is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, but feel free to play with that ascendant. Jupiter is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. That was the third piece of this. And again, just another really great election for it. The fact that the moon applies to Venus in the second house, I think, is kind of cool in this one because, second house about money. The sun could be about building good habits with money, Saturn as well. So there's a lot of good symbolism here to take into consideration as well. So definitely look into that one. And then finally, our Australian version of this chart is going to look very similar to the North American version. Here, the moon is in the 16th Lunar Mansion on the ascendant again. The difference now is that we're no longer talking about the trine to Venus. It's now completely that trine to Saturn. So unlike North America, where it can depend a little bit based on what your time zone is, which planet you'll get, and whether or not you feel comfortable working with that planet, it's just Saturn. The moon is already past the trine with Venus. So it's all about Saturn here. And again, the Saturn aspect can be very useful for building up good financial habits, for building up good credit, and kind of working your way through, the hard way in many instances, or in many, how many of us might measure it or consider it to be like the hard way. Saturn can help us kind of build those good financial habits, help us rebuild credit, rebuild financial health, and help us to learn those financial management skills that we may not have been taught by our parents or in school or things like that. So definitely consider it if you're at all struggling financially. If you feel like you're kind of drowning in debt, this talisman can help you kind of get started. And then, of course, there are a lot of good kind of debt management programs that you should look. All right, so our fourth electional opportunity is going to be for a Saturn planetary talisman. And unfortunately, this is something that is not going to be available to Australia. So I'm very sorry, my Australia listeners. You are not going to be able to grab this Saturn election. So Saturn in Aquarius is just about done, just a little bit longer to go, just a few months. And after that, we will not have a great Saturn election until Saturn makes its way to Libra in about 20 to 21 years. So our time with Saturn talismans is coming to an end. One day, I may decide to look and see what the actual final Saturn talisman collection is going to be, but it's not this day. I guess I like the suspense of it all. But so for this is going to be something that is only, I kind of turned to Empire there for a second. This is going to be something that is only available for North America and Western Europe. And the North American version is going to take place on January 14th at 9:08 a.m. So taking a look at this time, we can see that we have our big four things that we want to have when it comes to making a planetary talisman. We want the target planet, which is Saturn in this instance, to be in a sign of essential dignity. Typically, its domicile or its exaltation. Saturn is in Aquarius, its sign of domicile. At the same time, we want Saturn to be very angular, ideally the most angular planet in the chart if we can get there. In this case, we have Saturn conjoined the ascendant degree very closely. We also want the moon to be applying to that planet. The moon's next aspect should be an aspect to that target planet. And we do have the moon in Libra, which is fun because it's Saturn's exaltation, so there's a fun reception here. Is going to be that's going to be the moon's next aspect, this trine to Saturn in Aquarius. That's very good. And then the final piece that we want it to be either Saturn's day or Saturn's hour. January 14th is a Saturday. So that is Saturn's day. Saturn is in the name. And so all of our four pieces are there. That's what we want. Then we have to make sure that the things that we don't want are gone, right? So we want to make sure that the planet that we're after is unafflicted. Mars is not afflicting Saturn at this time. Saturn is not retrograde. Saturn is not too close to the sun to be combust. So Saturn is looking pretty good. We want to make sure the moon is unafflicted. The moon's not in a bad relationship with Mars. The moon's not in a bad relationship with the sun. It's not combust or anything like that. The node is far enough away for us to not have to worry about that, spoiling it. So all in all, just a very good, very kind of standard Saturn planetary talisman. So if you're in North America and you don't have a Saturn in Aquarius talisman, and your natal Saturn is not a source of woe for you, is not something that you generally struggle with, then I definitely recommend grabbing a Saturn talisman if that's something that you can see yourself getting some use out of. A very, very, very similar setup in the Western Europe and Northern African version of this chart, which takes place on January 14th at 10:02 a.m. Again, Saturn in Aquarius, Saturn on the ascendant. The moon's next aspect is a trine to Saturn. The moon in Libra being in reception with Saturn is very useful. Saturn is unafflicted by Mars. It's unafflicted by the sun. The moon is unafflicted by Mars, the sun, or the node. The moon is actually moving very fast in this election, which is fun. Kind of not exactly what you would expect in a Saturn talisman, but we'll take it if we can get it. So again, if you are an individual who can utilize this timing here, and you do not have a difficult relationship with your natal Saturn, I definitely recommend grabbing it. I don't know how many more options we're going to have for Saturn and Aquarius talismans, but they are, every one that we pass up is one less. Maybe I'll make a note to look at whatever the last one's going to be, so we just know what that date is. All right, so our next election opportunity is going to be for the 19th Lunar Mansion. And the 19th Lunar Mansion is a really fun one. It is a lunar mansion that is sort of specifically designed for the health of women and women's bodies. And so there's aspects here of like uterine health, female reproductive health, pregnancy, childbirth, contraception, and even magical safeguarding, like is banishing and protecting and warding kind of situations here. When we're dealing with the 19th Lunar Mansion in a waning moon period, we're not going to focus on things like when we're dealing with the 19th Lunar Mansion in waning moon settings, we're not going to focus on things like conception or pregnancy, because that's not something that the waning moon really wants to get a hold of. We're going to deal with things like contraception, or about the healthy menstrual cycle, the healthy menstrual process, menstruating healthfully. That's more what we're going to focus on. We can also utilize this within like kind of the magical safeguarding, warding aspects as well. So either one of those options, any of those options can be very helpful. This is an election that North America and Australia are going to have, so it's going to be another one that Western Europe and North Africa have to sit out on, unfortunately. But the North American version of this chart is actually very interesting because we have a lot that we can kind of do with it. So what I kind of set it for, kind of in my head, was for January 17th at 2:48 a.m. And in this chart, we have the moon in the 19th Lunar Mansion in the ascendant, and she is applying the sextile with the sun. And those can be very great things for... Oh, the moon square Saturn in this chart. Shit. It sure is. I'm a dum-dum. Okay. Damn it. That's unfortunate. I was really looking forward to this. But yeah, so... Unfortunately, Saturn, if you pick up a basic astrology book, like I probably should have, you would know that Saturn at 24 degrees of Aquarius will cast square aspects to 24 degrees Taurus and 24 degrees Scorpio, unfortunately. So that's going to be a problem. And there will not be a 19th Lunar Mansion talisman opportunity for North America after all because of that Saturn square. So that's no fun. Always make sure to double check. I'm glad you guys are here to help me double check my elections. So our final electional opportunity is going to be for the 20th Lunar Mansion talisman. I really enjoy the 20th Lunar Mansion. Traditionally, it is one that is associated with hunting. So if you can utilize it for hunting if that's what you want. It's like useful for hunting and making animals nice or tame or docile. So typically you probably wouldn't use it for hunting in a waning moon talisman like we are today, but we can hunt for a lot of things, right? You hunt for housing, hunt for employment, hunt for relationships, kind of a thing. That's not one of the things that I would really want to utilize it in a waning moon context. But I do think that the 20th Lunar Mansion is very helpful in like goal setting, like it's more like long-term oriented goal settings. So if you're in a situation where you want to complete a goal, so this is sort of like the New Year's resolution kind of talisman, right? But we have to make sure that what we are resolving ourselves towards, whatever our goal is more focused on losing something, whether that's I want to lose weight, or I want to cut back on my social media habit, or I want to, quit whatever other bad habit I might have. Like my goal is to come off this, quit smoking, blah, 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 blah. Then the 20th Lunar Mansion can be very helpful for helping you to accomplish that, especially if it's something that more realistically takes more time. Something like paying off debt can be one. Then the 20th Lunar Mansion is very helpful for kind of compared to lunar mansions that are a bit more severance oriented, like the 14th, like we had earlier, or potentially the 12th. So just kind of keep that in mind. It can be a great fallback, but the 14th and the 12th are better at being quicker in getting their thing done. Whereas the 20th, it's a little bit more understood that it can be a more long-term kind of a thing. So taking a look at our election, this is an Australian exclusive on January 19th at 5:21 a.m. And we're going to have, so it's like right at sunrise, the moon is going to be in the 11th house in the 20th Lunar Mansion. And at this time, she's going to be applying this sextile to Venus. Venus is a benefic planet, and benefic planets are all about helping people to, of course, better themselves. But it's another one of those things where it's like benefic planets tend to be good for separating when we want there to be more time to kind of fade into and out of something. So I really like benefic planets when it comes to things that are about like changing the body, because you don't want to change the body too quickly, right? At the same time, we have Saturn ruling the first house, Saturn in Aquarius here, who is also conjoined that Venus, which can be a very supportive planet to help kind of get you through any kind of difficulties that you might have. This conjunction taking place in the second house could also make this talisman very useful for financial planning. So that can be an aspect to lean into for this. But I picked this specific time for sunrise because I liked the sun being involved in this. The sun is a really good planet when it comes to habit setting, kind of based on the idea of like the sun rises every morning. The sun moves through the zodiac at a very uniform pace. So the sun, above all planets, is very useful for kind of like that showing up every day kind of energy, like showing up, doing what you need to do. It's very much like discipline oriented. It's very like honor system oriented. So it can be the sun can be a really great planet to lean into for anybody who's trying to create habits, to create healthy habits, obviously, for like self-improvement or self-betterment or helping themselves be more content with who they are and what they have to work with. So I really wanted to have that sun energy in this, for people who wanted to use this as a little bit more of like a New Year's kind of resolution type of a thing. So keep that in mind if that's something that you're interested in trying. Australia, January 19th might be a weird day to make a New Year's resolution, but January 2nd is probably a weird day to wear 2023 novelty glasses, but I'm doing it, so you can do this. But alrighty, everybody, thank you guys so much for being here with me today and talking about and exploring these election opportunities that we had through this 2-week period. Now my face has like the glasses mark on it. That's super cute. Very attractive. I want to give a special shout out to my patrons. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you're at all interested in helping to support the channel and helping me feed all these cats who have decided just to not be in like the past 2 videos for whatever reason, I guess their holiday break extends till they damn well please. I'm going to have a talk with them about their performance lately. Please check out the Patreon. There's a bunch of gifts and goodies and extras there, whether that's like a 6-hour comprehensive mini course on introductions to astrological magic, community private forums and office hours, talismanic gifts, and a whole bunch of other things. Please consider signing up for the Patreon. But thank you guys so much for being here. Hopefully there's something within this waning moon period that you can be able to utilize to work into your own practice, help you overcome kind of whatever situation or difficulty you're facing, to help get your New Year's off to the right start. I hope you all had a wonderfully fun and safe New Year's Eve, and I will see you back here on our Aquarius New Moon.